Verovkina Cave is the deepest cave on Earth, descending 7,257 feet into the ground. Reaching the bottom takes more than 4 days and thousands of feet of rope. With a cave this extreme, it's almost inevitable that something would eventually go wrong, and over the years, it has. The cave lies in the Gagra range of the Caucasus Mountains near the Russia-Georgia border. This limestone region, carved by prehistoric rivers, contains 4 of the deepest caves known on Earth. Verovkina is the deepest among them. Its entrance sits at roughly 7,500 feet above sea level, meaning climbers must first scale a mountain before even stepping inside. And once there, the opening looks deceptively ordinary, just a hole in the rock that drops more than a mile straight down into darkness. The entrance was first discovered in 1968, with early explorers descending only 377 feet before turning back. In 1983, Moscow's Perovo Speleo Club rediscovered it and pushed the depth to around 1,400 feet over several expeditions. Exploration stalled until 2000, and it wasn't until 2015 that a newly discovered shaft revealed the cave's true scale. By 2017, the mapped depth had extended past 7,200 feet, and in March 2018, explorers confirmed the final deepest point at the bottom of a subterranean lake, officially crowning Verovkina as the deepest cave in the world. In September 2018, the Perovo team returned, joined by photographers Robbie Schoen and Jeff Wade. Their goal was to continue mapping, collect biological samples from potentially undiscovered species, and document the entire descent. Verovkina requires a multi-camp system similar to high-altitude mountaineering. Because of its depth, 6 camps are positioned at different levels inside the cave. Over 4 days, the team descended through near-freezing temperatures, mud-filled tunnels, narrow squeezes, and massive vertical shafts suspended over open air. Thousands of feet of rope were their only way in and out. Eventually, they reached Camp 6 at 6,900 feet, built inside a large horizontal tunnel. From there, they visited the stunning turquoise lake at the bottom, a 50-foot-long pool surrounded by jet-black limestone that would sit in total darkness without artificial light. On day 7, part of the team began ascending early to catch flights home. At Camp 3, they encountered something alarming. Water was pouring into the cave. A powerful storm at the surface had triggered a flood pulse, sending massive volumes of rainwater into the underground system. Using a physical communication cable that runs through the cave, they warned the rest of the team below. At first, Camp 6 remained relatively calm. Flood pulses are a known risk in deep caves. Their camp was positioned about 300 feet above the lowest passages, meaning the lower chambers would need to completely fill before water reached them. But about 30 minutes later, a distant rumble began echoing through the cave. That rumble quickly grew into a deafening roar. The cave shook violently as a torrent of water blasted down the main shaft like a fire hose. Robbie watched in disbelief as the waterfall intensified. Though their camp remained dry initially, the situation escalated when a small hole near their tents began gurgling, and then filling with rapidly rising water. The moment they saw the speed at which it was rising, the decision was immediate. They had to leave. Robbie and Jeff prepared first. Robbie abandoned tens of thousands of dollars in camera equipment to avoid being slowed down, saving only the memory cards in a sealed bag inside his suit. They rushed to the ropes leading upward. To escape, they had to cross a narrow traverse beside a chamber that had previously been open air but was now nearly flooded. At the vertical shaft, water was pouring down with crushing force. Robbie clipped his ascenders into the rope and began climbing directly through the waterfall. The pressure felt suffocating, like his head was being forced into his shoulders. By tucking his chin beneath his helmet, he managed to create a small air pocket to breathe while ascending. At the top of the waterfall was a tight squeeze, the very source of the flood. Forcing himself through inch by inch against the torrent, he barely made it through. Jeff had to follow the same route. Once above, Robbie climbed frantically until Jeff shouted for him to slow down. Realizing they had reached a relatively safer, drier section, they made it to Camp 5 and waited anxiously, unsure whether the Perovo team below had survived. Down at Camp 6, conditions had worsened dramatically. The narrow traverse was completely submerged. The remaining team members had to swim to reach the ropes. Pavel, the team leader, was last. By the time he reached the flooded chamber, it had transformed into a swirling vortex as water drained deeper into the cave. He was spun violently and had to fight hard to grab the rope line. One by one, the team ascended, even carrying extra gear, eventually reaching Camp 5 safely. The flood pulse lasted approximately 20 hours, caused by a week of rain followed by a severe storm that had saturated the ground completely. The team later improved rain monitoring and installed additional escape measures. Despite the near disaster and destroyed camera equipment, all photographs survived thanks to the saved memory cards. But Verovkina would see another tragedy. In November 2020, a rope was discovered fixed at the cave entrance, something considered dangerous in the caving community because it allows unprepared individuals access. When the Perovo team returned in August 2021, they found crampons and an ice axe deep inside the cave, far below where they could have fallen accidentally. Descending further, at around 3,600 feet, they discovered the decomposed body of a man still attached to a rope. He was later identified as 37-year-old Sergei Kozev from Sochi, Russia, an avid outdoorsman who frequently took solo wilderness trips. Phone data revealed he had spent nearly a year preparing for the descent using Perovo's published expedition materials. He successfully reached the first camp, then the second, and appears to have lived underground for about a week before descending deeper into more technically challenging, wetter sections of the cave. At some point, Sergei likely realized he could not continue. When attempting to climb back out, he lacked proper foot stirrups for his ascenders, meaning he had no footholds for the long vertical shafts. Exhaustion and cold would have quickly taken their toll. Unable to climb out and trapped in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, Sergei eventually lay down and never woke up. Retrieving his body required more than 100 people due to the depth and danger of the cave, and the confined space posed additional risks due to decomposition gases. Today, Verovkina Cave remains the deepest cave on Earth, but its record-breaking depth comes with a harsh reminder. In places this extreme, even the smallest miscalculation can become fatal, and that same goes for this next terrifying exploration. Quick interruption. If you're enjoying this video, why not hit that subscribe button? We're on a mission to hit 500,000 subscribers, and when we do, 3 lucky fans will win a limited edition CreepyVids hoodie or shirt. Right now, 61.4% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, and your support helps us make even more awesome videos. So, don't miss out. Subscribe now, and let's get back to the video. In May of 1973, 8 divers entered a sinkhole in South Australia known as the Shaft. What began as an ambitious deep dive attempt would become one of the deadliest cave diving disasters in history. The Shaft is located near Mount Gambier in South Australia, a small city built on the slopes of a dormant volcano. The region is known for its limestone terrain, crystal blue lakes, caves, and sinkholes formed by water slowly dissolving the rock beneath the surface. Just outside the city, in a 5-acre dairy field called Thompson's Paddock, a farmer made a strange discovery in 1938. One of his horses stumbled in the grass, revealing a small hole in the ground about a foot wide. When the farmer looked inside, he saw it dropped roughly 20 feet before opening into water below. The shape appeared funnel-like, narrow at the top, widening deeper down. Concerned it might collapse further, he began dumping rocks into it to fill it in. Dozens turned into hundreds, then thousands. But every rock disappeared into the darkness without a trace. Eventually, the hole was widened to about 3 feet to allow exploration. In the mid-1960s, a diver was lowered in for the first time. After descending 23 feet to the water's surface, he discovered that the chamber expanded dramatically below, 56 feet wide at the surface and far larger deeper down. On sunny days, a brilliant sapphire beam of light would shine through the opening, illuminating the water. The cave became known as the Shaft because of that striking column of light. Further exploration revealed a massive central chamber 460 feet long and 260 feet wide, with the top of the rock pile sitting 118 feet below the surface. From there, two descending arms extended in nearly opposite directions, one reaching 260 feet deep, the other plunging to 407 feet. It was believed these tunnels connected to a larger freshwater drainage system beneath the region. At the time, however, the full depth remained unknown. The cave was widely considered bottomless. By 1973, more than 8,000 dives had already taken place in the shaft, despite no complete map and limited understanding of its structure. Cave diving itself was still relatively new, and safety standards were far less developed than today. On May 26, 1973, 9 dive instructors gathered in Mount Gambier with the goal of reaching what they believed could be a record depth, the edge of the perimeter at 250 feet. This was the point where natural light from the entrance disappears completely. It was also near a feature known as the drop-off, where the visible bottom suddenly vanished into darkness. The following day was a practice dive to set up a shot line, a weighted line from the surface down to the rock pile to streamline the real descent. The group reached about 200 feet without incident, staying within visible light. After resurfacing, they refilled tanks and prepared for the main attempt the next day. On May 28th, 8 divers entered the water. One woman, Joan, remained topside to assist with logistics. The divers descending were Robert, John, Peter, Gordon, Larry, and 3 siblings, Glenn, Stephen, and Christine. They made their way down to around 130 feet at the rock pile, then continued toward the drop-off. At approximately 180 feet, Robert began feeling strong nitrogen narcosis, a condition caused by nitrogen dissolving into the bloodstream under pressure, producing impairment similar to intoxication. Recognizing the danger, he signaled he was heading back up. The others signaled they would continue. At the time, diving protocols were drastically different. There was no requirement for cave certification. The group was using regular air for a planned 250-foot dive, something now considered extremely dangerous. Modern recommendations limit air to about 130 feet. At 185 feet, oxygen toxicity and severe narcosis can impair judgment or even cause seizures. As Robert circled the rock pile and prepared to ascend, Glenn eventually joined him, also running low on air. Larry and Peter surfaced shortly after, Peter with virtually no air remaining, but 4 divers were still below. Down near 200 feet, visibility suddenly worsened. Clouds had moved overhead, reducing the natural light entering the cave. Combined with disturbed sediment from fins, the water became heavily silted. The chamber that once appeared clear turned dark and disorienting. Christine, Gordon, and Larry were swimming together near the deepest section they had reached. Low on air and impaired by narcosis, Gordon and Christine panicked and swam upward, but not toward the correct exit. In limestone caves, dome-shaped ceiling pockets can trap exhaled air, creating mirror-like reflections that resemble the surface. In their impaired state, they mistook this reflection for the way out and swam directly into the ceiling. Larry's light briefly failed, causing him to drop lower in the water column. When it flickered back on, that change in angle allowed him to spot the real exit and escape. He surfaced along with Robert and Glenn. Realizing his siblings were missing, Glenn immediately grabbed a spare tank and dove back down. He reached 225 feet and found his brother Stephen's flashlight and camera. Beyond that point, visibility was 0. He entered the silt cloud, but quickly panicked and returned to the surface. Peter attempted another search but found nothing. Ambulances and police soon arrived. The next day, recovery attempts began, but heavy silt and extreme depth prevented immediate success. Months later, before official recovery resumed, a documentary film crew was allowed into the cave. While filming at just 50 feet under bright artificial lighting, they noticed what appeared to be a diver in the background. It was Stephen's body, lodged beneath a ledge near the ceiling. His buoyancy device was inflated, likely keeping him pinned upward. Further recovery operations in March 1974 located Christine and Gordon at around 185 feet, close together. It is believed they ran out of air in the ceiling pocket and died side by side. John was found deeper still, around 205 feet beneath a rock ledge. It's thought he was severely impaired by narcosis and may have swum deeper into the cave instead of toward the exit. The Shaft disaster became the final straw in a series of deadly cave diving incidents in the Mount Gambier region. It directly led to the creation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, CDAA, which established strict training standards and certification requirements. Looking back, several factors contributed to the tragedy: diving too deep on regular air, lack of cave certification, failure to use guidelines due to group size concerns, and the unpredictable loss of natural light. Today, such a dive would be considered extremely reckless. Since the formation of the CDAA and improved safety protocols, cave diving fatalities in Australia have significantly decreased. The Shaft remains a chilling reminder of how quickly overconfidence, poor visibility, and extreme depth can spiral into catastrophe. And you'll see that same pattern unfold in the next exploration. On April 6, 1994, legendary cave diver Sheck Exley attempted to break the world depth record inside the Zacaton sinkhole. It was meant to be the defining dive of his career, and it ended with him never resurfacing. Sheck's obsession with diving safety began decades earlier in Florida. In June of 1968, Sheck and his older brother Edward went to Wakulla Springs, a popular swimming spot south of Tallahassee. Scuba diving was prohibited there, so the brothers would free dive instead, pushing their limits on breath holds. That day, Sheck had a new wrist depth gauge, and the two began competing to see who could reach the deepest mark. Edward made a serious push, went deeper than ever before, then suddenly went limp and began sinking. Sheck dove after him repeatedly, but couldn't reach his brother without scuba gear. He sprinted to his car to grab a tank and collapsed from exhaustion. A fellow swimmer entered the water, pulled Edward to the surface, and Sheck performed CPR on the beach until Edward began breathing again. But the rescue came too late to save him. Edward was placed on life support and later taken off when doctors confirmed he had no brain activity. That loss destroyed Sheck, and it became the fuel that shaped the rest of his life. He threw himself into safety standards, protocols, and deeper, more technical diving. The first time he entered an underwater cave, it felt like an obsession clicked into place. At the time, cave diving was still new and poorly regulated, so Sheck became one of the leading minds pushing it toward structure and survival-focused training. In 1979, he published Basic Cave Diving, a blueprint for survival, a book still viewed as a foundational manual for cave divers. He wasn't just an author, he was one of the most experienced divers alive. By age 23, he'd logged over 100 cave dives, and by his mid-40s, that number had climbed past 4,000. But what truly pulled him was extreme depth. The deeper you go underwater, the more the risks multiply: crushing pressure, nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, decompression sickness, all of it stacking at once. Nitrogen narcosis can mimic intoxication, then progress into hallucinations, unconsciousness, and total loss of judgment. Decompression sickness happens when nitrogen absorbed into the body returns too quickly during ascent, forming bubbles in the bloodstream. Most divers manage these dangers with carefully planned decompression stops and gas blends designed for deep diving. Sheck was unusual. He appeared to be almost immune to narcosis compared to other divers. In 1970, while assisting two divers attempting an air-only depth record, Sheck reached 465 feet before feeling narcosis at all, while the two divers he was supporting died during the attempt. He was also the first person to ever dive below 800 feet using technical scuba diving, a feat only around 20 people had attempted as of 2021. And despite decades of extreme dives, Sheck never once suffered decompression sickness. By 1994, Sheck held the 3 deepest dives in history and had previously set a record at 881 feet. He believed he could go further, but he needed the right location. His friend and diving partner, Jim Bowden, told him about a place that might be the deepest sinkhole on Earth, Zacaton. Zacaton isn't technically a cave, but a cenote, an inland sinkhole formed when bedrock collapses and exposes groundwater. When Sheck first dove it in 1993, he surfaced exhilarated. Almost immediately, he and Jim began planning a dive to 1,000 feet and beyond. They spent the next year obsessing over details: gas calculations, tank placement, depth schedules, practice dive after practice dive. Everything had to be perfect, because at those depths, a single minute at the bottom adds hours to decompression. Their plan became massive: 6 different gas blends, over 30 tanks, and roughly 50 decompression stops. Even with staged tanks designed to reduce time, the ascent would still take about 10 hours. They would not enter Zacaton directly because sheer rock walls surrounded it. Instead, they'd enter through a nearby spring and swim through a 600-foot tunnel connecting the spring to the sinkhole. Before the attempt, 2 weighted guide ropes were placed for descent and ascent. Jim would go first, with Sheck following 10 seconds later to avoid collision during the fast drop. Their descent rate was planned at 100 feet per minute, meaning the bottom could be reached in roughly 10 to 12 minutes. Sheck's plan was to touch bottom and immediately ascend. But even as the plan came together, Sheck had started thinking about his mortality in a new way. In 1993, while diving South Africa's Bushman's Hole, he experienced the first major underwater scare of his career. He was descending toward 863 feet when he began trembling violently. His vision fractured into countless tiny circles with dark centers. His skin became intensely itchy, then began to sting. This wasn't narcosis. It was likely high-pressure nervous syndrome, a condition linked to helium at extreme depth that can trigger tremors, sleepiness, heart rhythm changes, and reduced mental function, often appearing below 500 feet. Sheck had been descending at 100 feet per minute there as well, and the symptoms worsened until he was forced to ascend. The experience shook him psychologically. After that, he announced something to the diving community. The Zacaton attempt would be his last extreme depth dive. Crossing 1,000 feet would be his final line. On April 6, 1994, 6 days after Sheck's 45th birthday, and during his spring break from teaching, the team drove to Zacaton for final preparations. News of the attempt drew sports publications and even a small TV station. Local farmers and residents gathered along the cliffs, watching. Before the descent, Sheck and Jim floated at the surface, closed their eyes, and meditated, mentally running through the dive while slowing their breathing. Then they opened their eyes at the same moment. Sheck nodded. At 9:45 a.m., Jim disappeared beneath the surface with Sheck close behind. They descended on compressed air to 300 feet, then switched to heli-air, helium mixed with regular air. At 600 feet, they switched again to trimix. They were carrying roughly 200 pounds of tanks, which also helped their rapid descent. Around 750 feet, the first major problem hit. Jim began involuntarily trembling, HPNS symptoms. He later realized his descent rate had been faster than planned, meaning he had been breathing helium deeper than intended. Still, when he looked toward Sheck's rope, he saw Sheck's light descending past him toward the bottom. Jim felt forced to continue. At 900 feet, Jim checked his gauges and was shocked by how much trimix he had already burned through. One tank was already empty, and the second was down to around 1,000 pounds per square inch. Worse, if pressure dropped below 500 pounds per square inch, gas would stop flowing through the regulator. Jim had to abort. At 925 feet, he inflated his buoyancy device and began ascending. His computer set his first decompression stop at 450 feet, and by the time he reached it, his trimix and heli-air were gone. A decompression tank waited there, but when he opened the valve, the force of the gas blasted through, ripping the regulator out of his mouth. He reacted quickly, switching to compressed air while trying to fix the malfunctioning regulator. When he couldn't, he had to continue ascending with the tank under his arm, opening and closing the valve each time he needed a breath. An exhausting, miserable process, while still needing multiple decompression stops before reaching the next stage tank at 300 feet. When he finally reached it, he swapped to a working tank and turned his attention back to Sheck. Above the sinkhole, the support team watched Bubbles closely. About 2 minutes after the descent began, Bubbles vanished. Expected, because of a ledge around 250 feet. Based on the plan, Bubbles should reappear within 12 to 18 minutes. Right on time, Bubbles rose above Jim's rope, but none appeared above Sheck's. At first, they assumed delay, but as minutes stretched on, concern became fear. Support diver Ann entered the water to meet Jim and see what was happening. Underwater, Jim looked toward Sheck's rope and saw it slack and motionless. There was nothing below, no light, no bubbles, only blackness. He tried to convince himself Sheck was simply behind schedule, but when Ann reached him at a decompression stop, the worry was undeniable. On the cliffs, Sheck's wife Mary Ellen sensed something was wrong when she noticed the others were gone. She went to the spring and found Jim's wife Karen and support diver Marcus visibly distraught. Karen told her Sheck might be in trouble, and before the sentence was finished, Mary Ellen was already in the water, swimming through the tunnel. Mary Ellen reached the ledge at 250 feet expecting to see something, anything, but there was only darkness. She descended slightly, but without the proper gas to continue, she had to turn back. Karen waited at 100 feet to meet her, and when Mary Ellen returned, she was in tears. Karen checked Mary Ellen's depth, realizing she still needed 30 minutes of decompression before surfacing. Karen held her through the entire stop. On the spring bank, a photographer noticed Bubbles, raised his camera, and captured Karen and Mary Ellen surfacing. When they removed their masks, they were both sobbing. Mary Ellen then screamed in grief, a sound that reportedly stayed with everyone who heard it. Jim was still trapped underwater in decompression for hours. Eventually, another support diver reached him around 60 feet and confirmed what he already feared. Sheck was gone. Until then, Jim had clung to the smallest possibility that Sheck was simply delayed. With that confirmation, the waiting became torture, suspended in water for hours with nothing to do but think. After nearly 10 hours, Jim surfaced alone. The shock around Zacaton was immediate and heavy. For days, the team struggled with what came next, but eventually they had to return and retrieve the equipment. When they pulled on Sheck's rope, it was far too heavy. Unused bottles were still attached. Working together, they hauled up more than 1,000 feet of rope, and when it finally broke the surface, they realized Sheck's body was at the end of it. What happened at depth will never be fully known. One theory is that Sheck suffered an HPNS event severe enough that violent tremors caused him to lose his regulator and drown. Another possibility is that something in the gas planning went wrong. Too much nitrogen, too much helium, too much oxygen at depth, or even gases too low. Any major miscalculation could have caused incapacitation. It also wasn't clear how Sheck became tangled in the rope, but the way he was attached looked more intentional than accidental. Some have speculated he knew he was dying and tied himself in so his body could be recovered without forcing anyone else to risk their life to retrieve him. A week later, Sheck was honored by his family, friends, and the diving community that benefited from his decades of work, making the sport safer. He was buried next to his brother Edward in Jacksonville, Florida. And in a cruel twist, when Jim emerged from Zacaton that day, he did so as the new world record holder for the deepest dive on a self-contained breathing apparatus, surpassing the record Sheck had set and was trying to break when he died. Today, only 5 people have ever reached 1,000 feet underwater, and none of it would be possible without Sheck's influence on cave diving and technical diving. The current depth record stands at 1,090 feet, set in 2014, but for many, Sheck Exley remains the name most inseparable from the pursuit itself, and from the cost of chasing the edge of what a human body can survive. That's all for today, folks. If you want to see more of this creepy content, click on the video on screen.